On our earth, before writing was invented, before the printing press was invented, poetry flourished. That's why we know that poetry is like bread.
Hmm.
It should be shared by all, by scholars and by peasants, by all our vast, incredible, extraordinary family of humanity. That was Pablo Neruda. I'm Bob Holman, and this is the Poetry is Bread podcast where poetry challenges us, makes us think, and with imagination and courage changes the world.
Mm.
Aja Monet, what do you say when the poems do what they do? I was lucky last night to be one of the privileged many who filled the LPR, Le Poisson Rouge, to the rafters and ever afters for the opening night of the Winter Jazz Fest, where the headline act was, can you believe this? The musician, activist, composer, but always first and foremost poet, and all that implies. Aja Monet. Oh, the thunderous applause.
Aja.
I'm sorry, Aja. You got me, Aja. So tell me, Aja, I think we have done this before.
Yeah, I was saying to you that you won't remember, but when I was a part of Urban Word, I think around that time, maybe a little after, as a young youth poet in New York City, I got invited to do a radio interview with you on WBAI. Maybe someone could find that somewhere.
Yeah,
but I read
go.
a poem. I think it was a love poem. I don't remember, but I remember reading the poem and you telling me that I sounded like the surrealist poets. That you were really reminded of the Negritude, and you asked me if I knew them, and I didn't know them, and that's when I learned about them. I learned about them through you, and that became a big sort of like guiding North Star for me over the years.
Well, you know, one of the things that you do in your readings and in your poetry is to reference the ancestors, the precursors, the lineage that leads to you, and it's one of the extraordinary parts of how you place poetry in the center, and the surrealism is still there in your work, moving around and taking us places we've never been before. Likewise, last night you actually did a cover of, and I want to tell you, I've been to a lot of poetry readings. I've heard poets read a poem for somebody, but I've never heard somebody in a musical setting do a cover like you did last night for Gil Scott-Heron. You know, so how does that come about? How, and what do you feel following, getting his words out there as well as your own?
Yeah, I think for me, like, I want to make it known that we come from a tradition and that we are part of a long continuum, and you're a part of that legacy and that tradition, and there's so many other poets that you've helped to kind of platform and be a channel for, and be a kind of a someone that I think gives avenue for the voices to kind of be in the world and impact people. And so for me, I think because of the lack of education in terms of all across the country, but definitely for our young people here, there's a lot of people that are not given and afforded the opportunity to be exposed to people like you or poets like you, and growing up in New York City, I think it was a privilege that I got to be around. I mean, I met Amiri Baraka. I spent time with him. I've seen Sonia Sanchez. I saw Maya Angelou read before live. I saw, so many great, Jane Cortez, like so many great poets that were just around and doing local, these venues that we have. And I think having access to that, I don't ever take that for granted. And I think that it's so important for people to know that we come from a tradition, that it's not just like a feeling you get up there and just do. Yeah, that's part of it. It is intuitive, and there is a lot of one's personal expression, but there's also skill and technique and study, and there are people who we came from. And I think that it's important for people to know those references, not because we're trying to replicate them, but that we're bringing that all forward and into every moment, and it's part of the moment. And so Gil is Gil, you know.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to try to sing like Gil, because I didn't want to do that, and I didn't want to do it exactly how he did it.
Right.
But I wanted people to recognize, you know, what does it mean? I'm going to be starting the year off at this time of all times at Winter Jazz Festival in New York City. I remember listening to Winter in America.
Winter in America.
Yeah, I remember listening to that record actually on my way to a gig in Finland, and we were in the airport from to Helsinki, and we were on the road, and the snow was coming down, and I'm just playing the song. And I was like, man, this is today, you know. It's
right.
never, it's right now. So
it is Winter in America, absolutely.
Literally, figuratively.
Exactly,
you know?
Metaphorically, and the shroud of cold that is over this country as we wait for a couple of weeks with the outrageous irony of an inauguration of a tyrant on the same day as Martin Luther King Day has to be, well, it's an astonishment. And yet you called us last night the divided states of America. I thought that just sent shivers up me when you said that.
Yeah, you know? It's been my little talking point, the divided states of America. I mean, when you think about it, a lot of people have a lot to say about this country from outside of the country. And when you're traveling as a touring musician, you recognize that in some way, shape, or form, you're a representative, and then you're not, because you feel apart and distant from. But then you realize, oh, people have a lot to say. And I'm like, well, you try bringing together, you know, these essentially countries, you know, because I mean, the size of Belgium is like, you know, maybe Texas. What is that? Probably even smaller. I don't even know. But it's like I think
France is the size of Texas.
Yeah, France.
I know one fact.
Okay, think exactly.
You got it.
So then it's like America is, you know, a really great aspiration, but it is truly an aspiration, and it's yet to fully reach that dream or idea or concept, and it's still an experiment. And I don't know if it's been a very good experiment, you know, in my opinion.
Where it stands at this point in that experimentation. One thing that, you know, because I can hear Amiri in you, and I can hear Jane Cortez in you, and I can hear June Jordan in you. I can hear Nikki, and of course Sonia, and you have that beautiful poem for Sonia. You know, I was just at her 90th birthday party they had here in New York a few weeks ago, and she is just so wonderful,
magical.
So indeed. But one of the things that you do that none of those people, that's new now, is the way that you bring it home to your family and your being, your individual being. There's not, I don't believe that any of those poets that I mentioned, and I want to put Langston in there too, because you gave Langston a lot of props last night, and you have poems for, you know, and from him. But none of them came to their family, their roots, their who I am as an individual, the way that you do, both in your poetry. But I got to tell you, last night, especially with Uncle Shamba, is that Shamba, Uncle Shamba, who was your Greek chorus last night, who was the other. Now, folks, you know, you all remember when Professor Steve Cannon used to sit at the end of the bar and at the New Eurekan Post Cafe and used to shout out, "Read the fucking poem!" You know, well, let me tell you.
Or what's his name from the New Eurekan? Oh, why is it escaping?
Miguel Algarin.
Yes. And the bartender.
All right, which was, well, there was Pepe Flores.
Okay. Pepe, man. Pepe, he was, rest his soul.
Well, that was the doorman you're talking about now. It's Julio Del Mar.
Julio, but also Pepe would
Pepe's
yell.
Still with us. Yeah, so
oh, no, it's not Pepe then. It's not Pepe then. It's, No, we recently
Okay.
lost him. We
Yeah,
recently lost.
okay, I know, I know who you mean, but I'm blanking on the name. But don't worry, folks, she's looking up to Google. Well, I'm going to keep the story going here.
It
With
was Pepe.
it was Pepe. Oh
It
no.
was Pepe.
Oh
We lost
well.
Pepe December 2nd or early December. I'm sorry, Bob. Did you not know?
Well, this is one of those moments, folks. Okay,
I'm sorry, Bob.
Uncle Shambra last night was a Greek chorus, was the call and response of family and the past in a way that I have never seen in any public setting before. And you were so with him as you were with us. And there was no antagonism. There was absolute love. I mean, love going on in that room. Now, I don't know if he's your real uncle or what's going on with that, and maybe you'll let us in on that. But he was showering you with love in such a way that it was completely interrupting the program, and we couldn't get to the poems because of what Uncle Shambra was saying there, you know. So, to me, that in its extremity is what you are able to do, you know, that is different. That is woman. To me, this is woman understanding the roots of all this in your family, and living in that while you're living through that all the way up to this political statement of the divided states of America, all the way up through all that politics.
Yeah. Well, I think the personal is always deeply political, and the political is personal. So, you know, I mentioned it. My family is a working class family. They came from, you know, union workers. My grandfather died a union worker on the job building the water tunnel, the largest New York City water project in the country, as far as I've been told. And from there, you know, my family was greatly impacted by that loss, and had to take, you know, the city to court and all these things.
Goodness.
And then there was my uncle following that legacy and going through his own battles with jail and prison and all types of things, and then being a union worker himself and helping the city with his jobs, my brother as well. And so I've been on my own pretty much since I was fairly young, around 16, but I always longed for my family to be more connected and more together than we have been. And no matter what has gone on, you know, family is family. You always have your own trials, tribulations, triumphs, etc. I've always had respect, a grave amount of respect for my family, because I learned a lot about myself and the values that I have and the things that I care about through them, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They may not know how to distill that, you know, and present it in the most politically correct way or whatever that may be. But I think they're very expressive, and I'm trying to find ways to continue with that authenticity while also respecting others' participation in the chorus, you know, that I can honor their voices while also honoring that I'm a part of many voices. And I think that's the part that they always struggle with a little bit, is that it's not always just about them. And I think that's the lesson I had to learn about my family, is I wanted to be responsible for my life, but I didn't want to always, I knew that the issues I'm facing, the issues that we're dealing with, that my family's had to deal with, wasn't just their problem. It wasn't just them struggling with what they had to go through. And once I got politicized and educated about how I'm connected to a larger, you know, society and community, and a part of a lot of my education, my political education, was through poems. It was through poetry. And that became my little safe space. That became my little haven to find ways to communicate sort of this unlanguageable, you know, truth that
unlanguageable.
Yeah.
All right, I'll take that.
Truth.
A poet who's speaking unlanguageable.
Yeah.
All right.
Or, you know, just not that which cannot be spoken or described or articulated at times. I mean, the attempt and the pursuit of that is really what we struggle with as poets. And sometimes people feel as if, oh, well, you're a poet, you have the words. And I even just saw you right now, and you were trying to. There's like
Yeah.
this thing where you're
Yeah.
grasping,
Yeah.
and you're still always grasping. It's never, and even when you do, you never fully full. It sometimes falls through your hands.
Oh, well, yeah, but yes, oh gosh, I love that because it's always a failure. You always got something else to pick up. But boy, oh boy, last night was no failure. Last night
No.
was such a success and lifted everybody up. And to have a poet opening up for the Winter Jazz Fest in New York City is unheard of. Now, you can talk about how, us being in the trenches and all, but there's a way in which you're further out there now. You're bringing the word actually to people who didn't know that there was a word to be brought. That a poet has a place out there. Where I don't know a tour of poets. Dylan Thomas did not do did not do the dates that you're doing because you've hooked up with this great. You got this great band behind you. You've got is it the new book that's going to come out that has the poems that you're working with in this band? It's going to have the same title as the album, or how's that working?
No, I have a book of poetry called Florida Water that's coming out in June.
Okay.
And some of the poems, so the album is When the Poems Do What They Do. It comes from, that title comes from the For the Sonia poem. And it's like in the line it says, in the poem, it says, when the poems do what they do, they get it done. And the only reason why that became the title was because when I recorded the album, which was in the middle of the pandemic, I just recorded, I didn't write new poems for the album. I just had poems I had lived with for some time. And I brought them to these musicians and I said, I want to do an album with these poems. And I want to do an album that feels live. I want it to be, as organic, as improvised as possible, because for me, that feels like the most true, sentient way to experience music and poetry. I don't really like the idea of just being, a poet with background music. I want to, I feel something more deeply when I'm engaging with music in real time. So I wanted the album to feel like a live record, like for us to be almost, if I could have had it, I would have loved for it to be a live performance where there's an audience, but it was the pandemic, so we didn't have that ability. So we did it in a studio, but everybody was in the room. And so those poems, they were poems I had spent time doing in different times and different parts of organizing the community. And they had a life, they had a presence, they had a breath. I had spent a lot of time with them. I felt more embodied with them. So when I recorded a bunch of poems, and when we decided to put the album together, it was like, okay, well, there's no theme. There's no like one specific theme. It's a range of things. And so what is the theme? What is the thing that's going to hold them together? Well, the thing that's holding them together is this one line, is that when the poems do what they do, they get it done. And they all felt like poems that were about trying to get people to see poems as a doing, as a thing, as a living embodied practice. And so that became how we encapsulated the album or brought it together, brought it all home. So the book has some of the poems from there because it was around the time that I was organizing in Florida, right, and I was doing community work in Florida. And that is what this book is about. This book is just dealing with poems that came up in my relationship around a community organizer I was dating, but also being an artist, trying to balance being a lover, an artist, an organizer, and some of the struggles that you find yourself in, and trying to respond to state violence or systemic violence, but also I'm a sentient, precious, vulnerable woman who wants to be loved and wants to be loving and doesn't want to always fight, and doesn't want to have to fight for everything. And so the struggle for that and the struggle to deal with that is a whole other element of the book. And then there's the climate and the weather and the things changing in Florida and water and cleansing and the ability for water to be a healer or to cause despair, or suffocation.
Destruction.
Yeah. The elements, the elements.
I'd say that probably last night I knew half of the poems, maybe more, maybe, I don't know. But around that from your first book, My Mother Was a Freedom Fighter, which is folks, if you don't have it, you got to go get it.
Mm.
Haymarket Books, brilliant publisher, and they're going to bring out the new book too, right?
Yes, yes.
And
yeah, there are some poems from that book.
the poems from that book.
Unhurt, I think.
Unhurt is in there, and what else? Why My Love is
no, Why My Love isn't in there. Weathering.
Okay, and
Weathering.
I wrote down a few someplace. Let me see. What My Grandmother Meant to Say. You did last night, isn't that in the first book?
Yeah, it is in the first book.
Oh my goodness,
that's the first time I've ever done that with music.
Last night?
Yeah.
One of my favorites last night.
Was
I want to tell you, and of course you get into the Spanish there, and that part of your background is especially since you were down in Miami at the time. Have you moved from Miami now?
Yes,
You're in LA now?
I am in the middle of this very terrifying time.
It is my daughter and son are both out there. So
really, are they okay?
They're okay. My daughter didn't have to leave. She wasn't evacuated, but she did leave. She's got a 5-year-old, and the air, etc. So she did leave. But it's an awful time. I hope your folks are all okay out there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people lost homes. And things. It's very, very tragic.
It's devastating. It's where we are. It's the chaos of where we are in the world. And I love the way that you picked that title out as it's just some words strung together. How poems do what they do. I mean, the word comes from Greek word poesis, which means to make. What are you going to make? Well, the thing about a poem is it doesn't make anything. It just is, as somebody once said, but it also is you're creating a world in that one word. There was another time last night where you said, I wonder why the world ain't got my back, and I always seem to have yours. And I think you were referencing a single person at that point.
Mm-hmm. Well, it could be kind of
both.
It
could be both. Yes, that's so right. You want that ambiguity, don't you, poet?
I love it. I love it when people, it's always the best when you can. I mean, that's the license of being a poet.
Yeah.
The license of being a poet is, I think, being able to do that, and people never really knowing what you mean.
Well, the poet is always the last person to know what they meant when they wrote it down.
I love that.
Sure.
I love that you started with the Pablo Neruda quote, because I actually didn't. I might have heard that years ago, but I haven't read that or heard it. And yesterday I was. I think I said it on stage. I said, I want my bread and my roses too. And I think that it's sometimes funny how this happens in jazz. I think musicians talk a bit about it all the time, but how like you'll have these downloads that you think are original, but they're not. You're not, and you don't realize almost until someone tells you, and you're like, oh my God, Pablo Neruda already said that.
Yeah.
Like I knew I mean, I don't know if I heard it, but I felt it. And here I am, still conjuring up that same thing. So it's kind of funny how that happens too, where musicians will do that. They'll play a chord or they'll play something and they think they originated it. And then little do they know they might have heard it somewhere or somebody else played the same thing. And it's funny how we all, I guess it's that new sphere they talk about, but how we all kind of download and get these nuggets.
The thing about the musicians doing it is because they only live in the oral tradition. They only live in the sounds of it. Poets these days are supposed to be exiled to the page, but the way we're talking and the work that we do is very much in the oral tradition. Your performance last night, exquisite. They're listening to you so good, and yes, it is improvisational. But I was struck by the way that the word silence works in your poems, and the way you've got the musicians, and the way the musicians are sensitive enough to know what silence means. Also,
yeah. I mean, it's the best part is when you get musicians that really understand what you're doing. I did another podcast. And I was talking to them about reading this book by Ntozake Shange on language and sound. And she talks a lot about what we're doing as musicians, that, you know, people study, they'll be able to say, oh, that's Coltrane. You know, they'll listen and they'll be like, they can tell how that trumpet player is playing. That's Coltrane, or, oh, that's, you know, that's Miles Davis, or, oh, that's, you know, whoever it may be. And they have those sort of reference points because of the way that they've been listening and how deeply they've been listening. And she says, well, you know, they expect the poet to be like, so almost like this all-knowing voice that speaks for everything and has this universal voice, but not a particular specific voice and sound. And she illustrates these, you know, is this Leroy Jones or is this Amiri Baraka? And she gives kind of these quotes of the poem on the stanzas on the line. And she's inviting the reader to recognize that, like, you know, poets, we know, you know, when somebody, you've lived long enough, oh, that's how the Cats was doing it in Watts, or in you know, in Chicago. That sounds like, you know, them guys over there in Chicago, or that's Brooklyn, and he's from the Bronx, you know, or whatever it may be. You know, you can tell who they studied with. You know, oh, you studied with Marie Howe, or you studied with so, you know, it's like, for me, that's how I have respect for poetry, and knowing that we're doing something musically. There is something happening. And you can hear it. I also studied with Jeffrey McDaniel.
Oh, yeah. There's a slammer for you.
Yeah, he
found
was.
his way in the academy.
Totally did. Yeah. But I think
Were you at Sarah Lawrence?
Yes, I studied with him.
Okay.
And so I think for me also, he was a musician. He might not consider himself that, but I think the great slammers were great musicians if they really knew how to wield the words.
Patricia Smith,
sonically.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Oh my. Yes.
Yeah. So when you hear them, you know, people are like, oh, wow, they're just, the poem is so strong. It's like, yeah, the poem is strong, but it's also how they're saying and what they're saying, and the conviction and the poise and that silence in between, and, you know, the breaths and the way that they hold a word, or they pause a phrase. And so to me, that's part of the tradition. And so, you know, meeting musicians who recognize, and Tazaki said, you know, a musician will ask her, okay, can you send me the music? And she's like, well, if you need me to send you the music, don't come to the gig. You know, and she was like, I didn't, if I wanted a background music, I just play, you know, have somebody else, or have whoever play, you know, or have a track played or something like that. But it would have been different if he would have asked me, send me the text, you know, send me the text. And I think that's important for her to make that articulation. It gave me the language and to understand what I'm doing. Like, oh yeah, there are musicians that know and recognize that what we're doing is music, you know, and that if you look at the written word, if the white academia doesn't take up so much the ownership of poetry for themselves, they could recognize that really it's supposed to be sheet music, you know, because all of the poetic techniques are sonic cues, most of them. How many syllables are in a line, where you break the syllables, you know, a lot of the sonnets or the certain poetic forms, it's sound. It's the construction of word sounds, or sound word music, you know.
As far as I'm concerned, there's no such thing as a performance poet. In other words, every poem is a performance poem.
And exactly, and Sekou Sundiata would say that.
Oh,
of course.
Indeed. Now, you know that Sekou's obituary was the first time that the New York Times ever gave an obituary to a poet who had not published a book.
Really? He never published a book?
Well, he has a little chapbook as Robert when he was back before he was Sekou. I guess
that's true.
But then he still doesn't have a book, which is, you know, another one of those heart terrors. Do you feel like reading a poem?
I don't know what I would read, but
well, I got your book. But anyways, people do that here, and it's just something for you to keep in mind.
I'll think about it.
Because
I do have some poems from the new book.
That would be swell to hear it. You know, last night who is that person? Well, let me start with this. I got so many questions. I was sitting next to Abiodun last night, which is to say, I was sitting next to a table that had Abiodun's name on it.
Yes,
and I'm waiting all night to see that man. You all know Abiodun Oyewole, one of the last poets and an inspirer for us all. You know.
Yeah, we put his name down in case he decided to come.
It was just a shout out to you, Abiodun.
Yeah, you know? I called him and I spoke to him. I've seen him.
Oh, good.
before, and he was supposed to try to make it, but we were very aware that he might not make it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know.
Then you had this woman come up. Was that Novena Carmel who came up with you? Was that who it was?
No.
Who was it who came up with you and sang that amazing? Sounded almost.
Oh yeah, she wasn't on the album or anything. She's just a friend. Her name is Ganavia.
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 Ghana. Well, that was a wonderful part too. What a surprise! What a beautiful voice, and what a way.
I try to have,
you.
If I can, if people are in town, folks that I really admire, that I think I need to hear. They give me so much inspiration, and I feel moved. And she is medicine. She's definitely medicine.
Wow.
So I feel honored for her every time she heals and she conjures and she connects and she brings you somewhere else and brings you back.
She did that last night. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you brought a mayoral candidate up there last night as well.
I didn't know what to do. I felt like it was the right thing to do, but also I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical of, I don't really like politicians, so.
I know, but yet you had the courage to say that you still do believe in the vote. You do still believe in a democratic system enough to bring up, I don't know what his name was, though I will certainly look for him, assuming he's around for the ballot next year.
Yeah, he is.
But that's I mean, the extremes of who you had up there, a shaman next to a mayoral candidate.
Real quick, I'm gonna say he buzzed. He said, and it didn't. No one picked up.
Oh well, he's got to come to the red door and buzz. It looks like Marcos is going to go downstairs. Marcos de la Fuente here in the fabulous. We'll get you back in, Marcos.
Okay, thank you.
Marcos de la Fuente of Sabuscan Poetas, the Bowery Poetry Club's multilingual open mic every other Wednesday night. Ram Devanini here on the controls. And Ram is pointing to My Mother Was a Freedom Fighter to see if you want to read those.
Oh yeah, I have a new poem I could read. But the other thing I want to say is that, a lot of people that I end up working with, especially vocalists, it's people I wish I could do what they do, and I'm scratching, I'm pursuing, I'm hoping to make people feel the way they make me feel. And some of those people, in terms of Ganavia and like other people, vocalists, Aaron Allen Kane, certain vocalists that I work with, what they do in, when they make the hairs on your arms stand up.
Yeah.
Or they just, you just feel the shiver across your body, or it's just a real powerful thing when the voice can really bring you somewhere else and conjure. And I think that that's a attempt or a hope or a wish or an aspiration. So there's that. And then just to follow up on the mayoral candidate thing, I don't know that I believe that voting is going to do the things we need it to do in the soul and hearts of people. I feel like there's a lot of work that has to be done for us to understand our power and to recognize our agency and to bring about people and educate people who are self-determined and then able to make the choice of the vote, from a real, I want to say, holistic or rooted and grounded place. But the vote is going to always be impacted by whether or not the people have power or the people have a sense of self, a sense of identity, a sense of connectedness, a sense of recognizing one and the other. And so that's only going to be as powerful as the people are. So if the people don't have access to their own agency, to their own sense of being and abilities, then we're going to see leadership that is continually going to fail us. And so that's why I think the role of the poet, the artist, the teacher, the everyday worker, the grocery, store person, whoever it is, the bus driver, we all have a responsibility to each other. And there's some poetry to learn from each other. Some of the greatest poets I've ever met have been, everyday ordinary people. Philip Levine says that. He said, he doesn't trust a poet that doesn't have a day job, And he used to bring his poems to regular, everyday, ordinary workers to see what they would think about them and revise them based off of that. He wasn't going to a bougie academic poetry workshop.
That's it. That's how Mark Smith, who was a construction worker who got bored who loved poetry, got bored at the readings. That's where the birth of slam was.
Yeah.
And I'm just going round and round here because you did have the courage to both bring a shaman and a mayoral candidate up on a stage last night, and you had an audience that was right with you through it all. And you came through the New Eureka where you were the slam champion, still the youngest ever slam champion to come out of the New Eureka. And you came on. Saul was one who told and kind of introduced me to you. Saul Williams is in the sphere here tonight, and Mahogany Brown, who was for the years that in the COVID years was the executive director of the Bowery Poetry Club. So this is a family that you are now, sowing the seeds of the words. You planted a seed, it won't grow into a gun. Dum da dum 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 dum.
No, of course, but I mean, we come from a great tradition, and I know that post COVID and even pre COVID, capitalism has done its number on a lot of cultural institutions and arts institutions, and so it's important for us to keep the tradition going however we need, whether that be through living rooms or podcasts or gatherings and bars, whatever it is that basements and churches, wherever we need to go. We just need to keep the word alive and keep people recognizing the power of truth tellers and healers and shamans. And I think, if anything, it was really funny. The mayoral candidate, his name is Zoran, I think is how you say his name. And he was, it was so great because when I invited him, my friends, we were laughing about the fact that you could tell him getting really hype off of the fact that music was playing behind him. And I was like, oh, are you a jazz musician now? He was really, and I think that I was excited that he was open to coming to speak to that moment. And if only for that, I think that, and he didn't know what he was getting into. And I think that I appreciate that. I think there needs to be some improvisational spirit in any type of leadership, because everything that comes will come with things you can't expect, and you have to meet the moment in the best and most authentic way. And I feel like, if anything, I was grateful he was able to do that, and hopefully New York City will do whatever's needed to support the working class people and families here, and hopefully we'll be there to hold them accountable.
Well, your generosity as a poet, because the world ain't generous to poets, all in all, especially in this country. No. But your generosity to the society at large is what came through there, and these people were so walloped by your poems and by the band, by this whole eruption of meaning and love, by Uncle Schomburg keeping the pace of the room happening.
Well, that was crazy.
You could do anything.
Yeah, that was crazy that you brought it up in a way. This is why I love poets, and I love poets who understand what we're doing, because when you say it as if, to think of him as the chorus, I didn't think of it like that, and I have to, while there was a level of embarrassment and also a level of, pride, and there was a mix of all these things. There's so many emotions when someone that and that you've seen. I mean, I remember the first time I saw my uncle in prison, locked up, and having to come see him in chains, and what that did to my heart. He was one of my favorite people in my life, and what I had to see him go through, and sometimes they don't realize that you are watching that. They're just being. All of us, we're just being. But the children, we pick up. We're being fed off of the good, the bad, the ugly, everything. We're absorbing it all. And I don't think any of them ever thought I would be where I am or who I am.
Who would? Come on, it's impossible.
Yeah, and so it's. I think it was special for him to see that, like, oh, I see you. And not only do I see you, I know you. I am of you, and everything that you've been through, you're not alone. I've been there with you, and it's powerful to do that for somebody in your family, let
And
alone
to
anybody.
have an audience be allowed to feel that with you and with Uncle Chambra, but what's going on between you, to share that intimacy with a crowd of strangers at a club, like that's where what's happening right now. I don't know if it's social media or digital consciousness. I don't know what it is, where it is. I don't know but you are bringing that into view. You're bringing that to the stage. You're bringing that you're birthing this ability to have that intimacy be in a public space and share it. That's vulnerability to a point that, there's not, I've never seen anything like it. And the audience is just taking it in like the ocean takes in. And the same, and whether that's, you telling us what it's like to be a band leader when you're a woman, a black woman poet, band leader, what you go through, whether that's you in the cosmos giving us language that's dripping with meanings, or whether that's just you having a conversation with Uncle Chambra, bringing up the mayor candidate and bringing up the shaman. That's a poetry reading.
Thank you. I like to think that the way you organize should be poetry. The way you curate, it's all poetry. It's all the way you prepare a meal, the way you make love, the way you dance, the way you walk down the street. I grew up with you guys, watching you guys be the poets, the living, breathing poets. Poets weren't foreign to me. They were regular, ordinary, everyday people who. We talk about Miguel Algarín, you talk about he was the drunken uncle, he was the uncle that was at the bar yelling at you to read the poem. And even if we were annoyed by it, we knew we needed it. And I say these were my stomping grounds. That's where I learned how to deal with whatever may come from the audience, because if it wasn't for the Bowery, Poetry Club, if it wasn't for the New York, if it wasn't for Barther, all these venues, we had to learn how to recite poems over all types of things, situations, people at the bar trying to get a drink, trying to talk to a girl, somebody having an argument, somebody whispering over. You have to be able to captivate and to get people's attention and to do something in a way that allows them to really face themselves and reflect in more profoundly and find some meaning in all of it, in all the mess of it, But it's really been one of those things that I feel like I can't say would not have happened had I not gone through the training grounds of being right here in the Lower East Side in the poetry community, because it was such a part of how we lived, Everything that you all were doing, some of us soaked up, Some of us really soaked it up and became hopefully something that can carry on that legacy and carry on that tradition, the good, the bad, the ugly, the in-between,
I'd say so. I'd say we're now in a room that's actually a little studio here, Bowery Poetry Studios, and we got some silence. I'm just wondering if you want to read us one of those poems from the new book from the Miami Waters?
The Florida Waters.
The Florida Waters. I'll get it right.
Yeah.
The Florida Waters coming your way soon.
Yeah, okay. And I'll read a poem that I've never really read anywhere before. It's called, I read this one to Pops, actually. It's called A State of Emergency. Twice in a blue moon, in the rhythm section of running, this swamp sway freshwater spring, spiritless spirited home of highway haunts, of conservative billboards blazing, antiquated trails, long arm of land bent on the map like a waving pistol, we water, keys jingling to the Caribbean Sea, a field of graves glimmering on the ocean floor, the sunken Guerrero ship soaked, water-walking Africans, shore-shamed, gator grill men, fools for sun-squeezed skin, of oranges and juicy fruit, mango juice chin, sticky fingers, braided palms and pools of light, tender pebble creeks we water, whistling in the nodding wind, daffodils rinsed by a breeze, a stream exhales at dusk, cicadas crooning, a diamondback rattlesnake in high grass, flower petals float on the flesh of rivers, agua florida, Ponce de Leon haunting the fountain of youth, at a genocide theme park, the smudge of the Timucua people's slaughter, we water, fluent in the cursive tongue of hurricanes, tracing the mid-Atlantic signature on our front porches, Black Seminole high priestess, goddess of the Gulf Coast, dripping of abandoned dreams in the lullaby of gnats, the sea as a doorway of syllables rising, where the land mourns and the sky chokes, sinking boardwalks, buildings sob of corrupt codes, politicians snorting gunpowder, drunk on stolen votes, trickle-down delusions, panopticon self-surveillance state, a police officer stationed in your bedroom, the judge washed up on our brains, where voodoo priests, santeras, and shamans pontificate premonitions and prescribe spiritual baths for mal de ojo, how I-95 cut Miami like a fresh wound, seagulls chatter of nonviolent wait-ins, Virginia Key mangrove snappers, La Villa blues bussing through a houseboat radio, drum circles barking in the chest, how these days locals don't visit the beach, avoiding tourist terrorists with neon hats and sunscreen masks, love bug road trips, dragonflies on a windshield, 7-year war trade treaties and trials, imported bigotry, pines, palmettos. In Florida, the insects complain about the people. We water, Bahamian fishermen turtling on Key Biscayne. When it's race, it pours. 4 black boys dragged from their names in Groveland. 400 bullets grin, chewing at the body of a child sleeping under a tree. A mob the color of burning flesh whitens the streets. This is the crime no one was charged for. In Florida, there's no truth, only sentencing in cruel, cruel fragments.
That voice inside your head was none other than Aja, Aja, Aja. And what more is there to say, Ms. Monet?
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for gracing us here at the Bowery Poetry Studios. It's still rising, the fact that poetry is bred. So why don't you grab yourself a chunk and see if it turns into some dough for y'all. Okay, it's nothing but poetry. Please catch Aja Monet, and she's in your neighborhood soon, as her book will be there too. So Florida Waters and Bowery Poetry Studios, and I'm speechless.